Hello and welcome to the Brothers Gaden podcast, the show that explores how to create more prepared, more resilient, and more responsible human beings. I'm Stuart, aka Gads the Younger. Gads non-senior. Well, I don't know. I'll think of a better nickname. In today's episode, this is actually an interview episode where we caught up with a very, very interesting human being, one Jim Varghese. So as you will find out from the interview, this is somebody who has qualifications coming out of the wazoo, as well as more experience, I think, than most people would fit into probably 3 lifetimes. So we caught up with Jim in an airport, so a little bit of apologies if there is any background sound. You might hear some lovely music and some flight reminder call times and things like that in the background. Just trying to ignore that. But yeah, we got the chance to catch up with Jim and hear his story, and especially interesting for viewers or listeners, I think, is his own personal system that he utilizes to assess the feasibility sometimes of companies or organizations, but also he applies this to his life. Very interesting man, very interesting philosophies on life. So without any further ado, here is Jim Varghese. Mm-hmm. All right. Today with us we have a very special guest. We're talking to Jim Varghese. Correct pronunciation, yeah?
Yep.
Excellent. Jim is a very accomplished individual who's going to be talking to us about a few different things today. And just to rattle off some of the background for Jim so people who are listening know what we're getting into here, and please feel free to correct me if I'm incorrect in any of these or if I'm off the mark. Current positions and roles: Chairman of the Leadership Company, Queensland, Chancellor of Torrens University, immediate past National Chair of the Australian India Business Council, Chair of the Board of Directors of the Springfield City Group, which I think is a very fascinating thing. You actually helped start your own city. That's really interesting stuff. Chair of Mindhive Pty Ltd, which is working with AI, cutting edge sort of stuff there. Chair of Jobs Queensland, member of Independent Parliamentary Remuneration Tribunal. Then you've also been Chief Executive of Springfield City, 30-year career in public sector, including roles in transport, main roads, education, training, employment, and primary industries in Victoria and Queensland. Some of your professional affiliations and recognitions: a Fellow of Certified Practicing Accountant, Australian Institute of Management, Royal Institute of Public Administration, and Australian Marketing Institute, member of Australian Institute of Company Directors. Your education includes a Bachelor of Arts with Honours, a Bachelor of Divinity, a Masters of Business Administration, a Diploma in Education, an Honorary Research Fellow of the University of Sunshine Coast, several government commissions and reviews that you've actually been a part of, and included in your honours, you've been awarded the Centenary Medal of the Order of Australia, and you are, most interestingly to me, and this is definitely something I want to talk about a bit more, a knight, an actual knight of the Order of Malta. Jim, welcome.
Thank you. The only 2 things you've missed in there is that I'm the co-founder and chair of the Advisory Council of the Australia-India Business Proprietor Limited. That's just over a year old, and also was awarded last year the Australia-India Businessman of the Year. 2023.
Wow. Congratulations. It's amazing.
And so I think that's amazing.
And chair of the Gandhi Salt March Company. That's very important.
Right.
So as I'm saying, any one of those things would be an amazing podcast or to talk about by themselves individually. But we're barely going to scrape the surface on a couple of those today.
Yeah.
But I just want to frame this for a little bit because I want you to get an idea of the background of where Jim come from. So Jim was born in India.
Yeah.
Moved to Africa and was raised in Kenya, and then moved to Australia in the middle of the Australian whites-only policy, immigration. So he didn't have an easy upbringing. There's nothing easy. Add to this, he's one of eight or nine children.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely extraordinary of what he's accomplished in this lifetime with, I wouldn't say less than a zero sort of start ground and worked his way up to achieve all these things within the lifetime. I think that's just absolutely amazing. What we want to talk about today, what we're going to start off with today is I want to talk about what I find really fascinating about Jim is something that he uses during his business world, during his personal world, uses it to frame his life, something he calls the three frames. I'm going to hand over to Jim to talk about in a minute, but I think this is an absolutely awesome way to look at life, to look at problem solving is something that we talk about often in our podcast, and something I think I want to give to our listeners is how do you do it? And you've utilised this to achieve many of those things that we just talked about in that initial sort of introduction. Jim, tell us about the three frames.
Well, over the last 25 years, I've looked at organisations and the improvement and everything else. And about 20 years ago, I noticed that there was where there was success in organisations, there was a clear picture of what they wanted to achieve, which I call the performance frame. They could measure it if they wanted to. They also had a very good picture of the key relationships needed to make it happen. And that's either by design or intuition. They did that fairly well. I call that the relationship frame. And the third frame, which I call alignment, the way they worked to deliver the results and the outcomes was pretty congruent on how to do it. So there wasn't any dysfunctionality between the two. The second is they were able to listen to feedback, positive and negative, to be able to see whether they're on track with what they were trying to achieve in the performance frame. Then finally, regardless of what happened, they believed in themselves and their capability, and they were not deterred by that. So over the years, I have since discovered that, and I've done many reviews, micro, macro, that if you score 3 out of 5 in each of those frames, your probability of failure is fairly low. If you score less than 3 in any one of those frames, your probability of failure is very high. And I found that I've now done 4 major independent reviews. I've used 3 frames in all of them. And it's vindicated in terms of the recommendations, effective implementation, where you're going. I've just completed a defense review for PFAS contamination. That is probably the most detailed 3 frames methodology I've used of all the reviews. The feedback so far has been positive. Positive simply because it resonates with, this is what I want. This is the key relationships that are really challenging me. And I'm really concerned about the way this is delivered. I'm concerned how they're listening to feedback and whether they really have the capability to make this happen. So I found testing it over 4 independent reviews, commencing with the Uber inquiry some years back on personalised transport. Again, it was effective there. And then doing the construction review with the QBCC, Queensland Building Construction Commission. That was a fairly tough review. Again, it surprisingly, to most observers, worked pretty well. And then I did for the Morrison government, I did the red meat review. And then finally the defence review for the Albanese government. So it's cut across all sides of politics. How does it work with all sides of politics? Because it's 3 frames, each side of politics can identify with what it is that they're on about, and they can see, all right, that's going to happen or that's not going to happen. So 3 frames to me is it's become a unique methodology. I have written stuff on it. I hope at some stage maybe write a book on it if I get the time. At a personal level, it's also very effective because it's the independent harmony between emotions, intellect, and values. So if, again, you score 3 out of 3 in each of those, which are really the 3 frames at an individual level, you'll be a very happy person. If you're in a partnership or a marriage, all of us don't have that as 333, but our partners will have one of those. And the interlink of partners with that produces happiness in marriages or partnerships. And I found that to be true from observation as well. So you could be very opposite from your partner, But she might be very high on emotion, I might be very low on emotion, I might have two. Right? But when you bring it together, the partnership is very effective. So it's also very effective on a personal level. And I want to explore that a bit more in the future on how you apply the three frames to your personal life, right? So it is in many ways a Trinitarian model. It's 3-3-3. It works. It's passed all the tests. It also helps you to be resilient. So when you have something that goes wrong, I always reflect and say, well, what went wrong? Inevitably, it's in the alignment frame, particularly in the public sector, where politicians and senior bureaucrats love to say, yeah, this is what we want to achieve. They publicise it, very good. They go to the key relationships, very good. Tick, I'll give them 4 out of 5. But how they deliver it within the bureaucracy, I'd go -1, -2, 1. Listening to feedback is so biased, I put 2. And they've lost the idea of capability. Public servants who really enjoy what they like doing suddenly lose their, vigour and vim because their advice is not being taken to match what's there. So that's it in a nutshell. That's what the three frames are about. It's had a long history now, and I have found now testing it in the real world, it works very well. Even where I chair boards, and I chair a number of them, I chaired one today, for example, of the Torrens board. Right? And I always do a check-in, short statement of how you feel and what your expectations are, and a check-out, short statement of what you now feel and what your expectations are. But when I sum up the meeting, I always sum it up against the three frames. I don't mention the three frames, but if anyone listening to that would see what it is. So this is what we're on about as a board. We discussed it effectively today. This is what we're on about in relationships. We have a few challenges there. And this is what we discussed in alignment. And because we're diverse, we have a big challenge in there. And listening to feedback, because we belong to multiple different organisations, US, Australia, etc., we need to listen to that. But overall, the reason we are successful as a for-profit university is that we believe in ourselves. We know we can make it happen. And we've demonstrated the domains that student happiness and profitability link together.
I love the sound of that, and it sounds very good sort of objectively, and I love the part that it's got an emotional content to it. I very much want to hear about how it goes in the future when you're applying that more to a smaller setting, to a relationship setting. Just give me an idea though of the business setting and how you evaluate. So you said there's 5 sort of points or key things that you pick up. Sounds like that it actually even goes into the negative a little bit as well. But how do you evaluate those 5 levels? Is that something that's preset when you go into objectifying these 3 frames? Or is it more, is it a gut feeling that gets you there? Or
no, I've the 5-point scale is used right across management. 1 being very low, medium, high, very high. So I've just used those 5-point scale to evaluate each frame and how it's been implemented. And if it's less than 3, I always advise the client, if I'm a consultant, that you've got a problem here. And if they move into excellence, they'll move into 4 and 5.
Yeah. So there's a definite line in the sand there at, say, number 3.
Yes, yes.
If you get 3 or less, you've got a problem. If you get more than that, then things are looking
If you
good.
score 3, 3, 3, no problem.
Okay.
But if you score less than 3 in any one of those frames, you will have problems.
Yeah.
Now, in the public sector, the fundamental problem is in alignment. They're just simply unable to, because of the way the bureaucracies are, and sometimes because of blind obedience, right, they don't really link how they work with their political masters. And yet their political masters would love it if they did, right? The second part is just listening to positive and negative feedback. People don't like looking at negative feedback.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm saying it's very important for continuous improvement.
Yeah.
And then the final part is that you should always tell your minister and everyone that we're a professional public service, we believe in capability. So I've used the 5-point scale in that sense, but you can also use it with management tools like the Johari window.
Yeah. Yep.
Now the Johari window, as you know, has 4 window panes. The first is how you view yourself. The second window pane is how you want others to view you. And the third window pane is how others see you in a way that you don't see. And the fourth window pane is what you ought to know that you don't know. Now, if you use 3 frames and the Johari window together, you're on a winner, right? And I've always said this to people. So when somebody says to me, Jim, I've used 3 frames, but I haven't achieved any success, and I've achieved 333. Well, I've questioned their evaluation for a start. Otherwise, they would have achieved success. And then when I've gone into it, I've asked them, so how do you view yourself? And they give me an expression. I view myself as very innovative, collaborative. And how do you want others to view you? I want others to view me in the same way, innovative and collaborative. How do others see you in a way that you don't see? And he said, I don't know what you mean by that, Jim. I said, how do they see you in a way that you don't see? Do you know what it is? And he looked at me and he said, some of them don't think I practice what I preach. So what does that tell you? Right? So the moment you have that, you now will be able to ask the question, why do they see it that way? So there's a problem in how others view you in a way that you don't see. So when that happens, you need to go back to how you look at yourself. Change it, and then say, this is how I want other people to view me, and then listen to any criticism positively, and then you'll find the 4th window frame will increase your capability. And so the Johari window actually is quite a good complement to 3 frames. And if you follow 3 frames, you'll master the Johari window. And after a while, you'll basically, you'd see criticisms as an opportunity, not as somebody trying to shoot down your ego or whatever. It's seen as a continuous improvement journey. And so I just thought, I've had fairly good feedback on that analysis, on how you use it together. But the trouble is we're in a world where there's so many methodologies put out by the big 4 consulting firms, for example. They make a lot of, it's spread around. But at the end of the day, I think we overcomplicate what can be done by organizations and individuals. And 3 frames for me is a very simple, powerful way in which to progress your company, your individual growth as a person, and your relationships in getting things together. So I always say to companies, and I'm chair of a couple of private sector companies, sometimes not very popular for saying that, I've said you've done brilliant work on the performance frame, looks fantastic, great vision, fantastic relationships, but the problem is that the way you're working and what our cash flow is doesn't allow you to connect well, right? And your feedback is so positive that you're not listening to why you're not making money. Right? And then capability, that means you don't have the capability within the company for somebody to tell you something you don't want to hear. Right? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what company you are, particularly for startups, cash is king. If you do not have enough cash to meet your immediate circumstances, doesn't matter if you've got the most brilliant rhetoric in the world, you will not succeed.
I love the idea of keeping it simple. When we were growing up, Dad always used to tell us, keep it simple, stupid, the old KISS method.
Yeah, KISS is true.
And I found this really pertinent when we were going through Special Forces, you're doing the counter-terrorism course, doing the room combat, and instructors come out, all right, there'll be 6 instructors and they've all got 9 points each, and by the time you got to the second one, you wouldn't remember a thing that was going on. One of the crusty old one officers, I remember there, he told the instructors, he goes, like, you've got 2 points each. Just say 2 points and that's all they'll remember, and they go through and do it again.
Yes.
Fair enough, they make some mistakes, but you'll pick them up next time.
Yeah.
And people would progress a lot quicker just on giving them 1 or 2 or 3 points like you're talking about there. Yes. Giving them 9 or 8 points. The human mind can't remember more than 9 digits. It's reason why telephone numbers aren't longer than 9 digits, because we struggle.
No, you're absolutely right.
And if you keep it simple, people will take it on board what you're saying, given the 3 frames, and be able to progress to the next phase, to the next step. So
I'll tell you what you're saying, why that becomes even more important is the advent of artificial intelligence. Right? So what artificial intelligence does is basically drive machine learning. Right? So you connect the two and you've got a completely new phenomenon. And so with artificial intelligence, you can actually accelerate the 3 frames, particularly in alignment end. And so that then introduces an even more powerful tool. How do you drive this in an ethical way? And one of the recommendations that I have made to the senior government ministers in this government is that they need to develop right now, before you lose it, an ethical framework for the implementation of artificial intelligence in Australia. If we don't do that, what you will find is AI will take over the three frames. And what you'll find is a completely different world.
So this is an area that I find fascinating, mainly because I kind of grew up in the 80s, so I watched a lot of like Terminator, machines taking over and things like that.
Yeah.
Just to take it on a weird tangent for you.
Yeah.
But AI is something that I definitely find very interesting, and I find it very interesting in the way that we are currently trending, the way we're currently implementing AI into our lives. So I just want to grab that point there and ask your idea on that. When you say, if you can explain it in the simplest terms possible, ethical use of AI, what does that mean to you? How would we do that in Australia?
Okay, well, the first one is that it's an affirmation of your values. So what are the values of Australia? What are the values of the population of Australia? What are the values that govern what we do? If you don't have a set of values, and of course it's in the legislation, you've seen values in there, right? You've seen the Crime and Misconduct Commission, you've seen all of these, they all have a set of values. So these values are very, very important that they implemented. The problem with the articulation of values is that they're ticked off, yes, you did it or you didn't do it. They're not looked at three-dimensionally, right? So we need to affirm that values drive AI. That is the values that the governments of Australia agree, these are the values we want followed, and this is what we do. I made that recommendation to the Queensland Building Construction Commission, that when they use information technology, it should govern the ethical framework of the construction industry. Otherwise, you get mismanagement, you get abuse, a whole range of stuff. So I'd say once you've got values, if you think of values, then you look at values, it's the performance frame essentially. Then you look at the relationships, so how does the values govern? And when you look at the relationships, people have different religious and non-religious beliefs. So they must be respected in the relationship frame. Very important, right? Then when you go to the alignment side, how do you make this happen? And governments of Australia, state and federal, have got to be very careful to make sure that no one is especially advantaged or disadvantaged by how the ethical framework operates. And to do that, you need to listen to the feedback that you're getting, positive and negative. And then you also need that the people you put in crime and misconduct commissions, ethical commissions, Indigenous commissions, whatever, they do have the capability to do the job they're doing. And again, you evaluate it on a 5-point scale. I found evaluating on a 5-point scale is actually quite useful. So in the end of the day, the big challenge facing Australia, in my view today, is values. What are the Australian values? For the first time since Federation, or even before Federation, when I asked this question to politicians from all sides, Labor, Greens, Liberal, I don't really get an answer that gives me a lot of confidence that Australia as a nation can articulate the values. Because if you can articulate the values, then it's much easier to deal with different religious and non-religious beliefs, for example. It's much easier to pass laws that can go through. It's much easier to give crime and punishment a new perspective, right? And it's much easier to embrace AI and make it for the betterment of society. Now, for example, I could argue that if AI was used, at its peak level, if you're born as a human, you're entitled to be paid to live, right? You don't have to apply for a dole, right? Now, this is a very radical view. So that because the dream of humanity from the adult has always been a classless society where where people can follow their endeavors, their aspirations. And if you've got the money to do that, and if you want to be entrepreneurial, you can do that. but you don't have to apply for an unemployment benefit if you are, and then you go through a whole series of processes for that. So AI could well create the wealth that we've never even dreamed about, but it'll also change the nature of government. The government may not operate in the current way it does. It may have to have a level of expertise that's supplementing AI, and elected representatives that represent the values of the community and the way forward.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Thanks for that, Jim, and your view on the three frames, how they sort of extrapolate into some of the real world and even into some of the future aspects of AI. And the problems, well, I say the future, but the problems that are immediate, they're coming up a lot quicker than what we think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I much appreciate that. But I think we might skip to our next subject now.
Yeah, whatever you like, no problem. Yeah.
And Stu, if you want to take your next area of interest.
Well, you know, I'm going to turn this into a talk about nights.
Yeah.
Right
Yeah. Yep.
Because this is a personal area of interest of mine. Obviously, I'm quite into HEMA, or historical European martial arts, and as part of the study of that, you go into the study of various backgrounds, including knights, orders of knights, and how they came about. And so there's one in particular, like, you usually say knights and people kind of think like, oh, yep, Crusades, Knights Templar, Knights Hospitaller. Hospitaller, thank you. Just choking on that one. Which a lot of people don't actually realise that, but some of these orders of knights continue to this day.
Yeah.
And this is actually what you are a part of, the Knights Order, the Malta, which is, its background has come from these Crusade Knights. So I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think if you're looking in the current context, we're currently focused on providing humanitarian assistance and assisting with international humanitarian relations, for which purpose we have I don't know whether you're aware of this, but we have a permanent observer status at the United Nations General Assembly, and that's been the case since 1994. Right? And so how did we come about? I guess you'd best describe us as a lay religious order of the Catholic Church since 1113. It takes a long time. And it's a subject of international law. The sovereign military order of Malta has diplomatic relationships with over 100 states and the European Union, and permanent observer status at the United Nations. So we regard ourselves as neutral, impartial, and apolitical. So, for example, if I am advocating for a particular issue, it might be values, it might be homelessness or whatever, I don't resurrect the Order of Malta for that. That's up to the national framework to do that. We just do the work. So, for example, in Brisbane, once a month we join with the Emmaus mission to feed the homeless and all. We're establishing another centre in the Gold Coast where there's very high levels of unemployment. So the idea is you always try and ground yourself in something very practical that you can actually do. And again, the same in Asia. We do a lot of work there, in terms of victims of cancer, a whole lot of stuff. Be it in Thailand or whatever, quite active order. Singapore, quite active. China and Hong Kong, quite active as well, across the world. So it's one of those things where, in terms of what we do, we rely on voluntary donations, which we do, and we also get a lot of, sometimes, funding from different governments. But at the end of the day, we're what we call a key volunteer force for delivering the charitable work of the Order of Malta in both religion and charity. And our mission is to practice our faith and practice charity. Simple as that. So we do have what's called a Grand Master, which is you take certain vows to do that. And for the first time, our current Grand Master is John Dunlap. He's from Canada, which is the first. It's normally the last one was from Great Britain, and so he's coming here later this year in September, and we are, we'd like to see recognition of the order as a sovereign order with diplomatic recognition. We'll be doing that across the board. We do it in a fairly low-key way. And someone has asked, are the Knights of Templar the same, the Knights of Malta the same as the Knights of Templar, which I'm sure you're familiar with. The Knights of Malta are not to be confused with the Knights of Templar, because the Knights of Malta were hospitaller knights. This is very important. In a hospital order that still works for the poor and the needy, while the Knights Templars have ceased to exist. They were more involved in the battles of the Crusades and everything else. So I hope that gives you some idea of what it is. There's a whole lot of stuff you can say on the Order of Malta. But if somebody asks me what the mission was, I'll say across the world, the Order of Malta is dedicated to the preservation of human dignity and the care of all those in need, regardless of their origin or religion. So, for example, in the Jerusalem Palestinian area, where there's a lot of work to be done in that hospital area, we work with the Muslims very effectively. And there's a lot of credibility there for the work given. And obviously, because of the relationship, we try and get on with all sides, not just one. We do have a hospital in Jerusalem that goes back to that 11th century. And we also have the history there of how the order has worked through to the current time. But we have always maintained the obedience to the Pope of the day. But that hasn't generally resulted in a lot of interference. But it's good for the order in that it can say it's a Catholic order, so it has to give obedience to the Pope. I haven't seen that as a big issue. So far, since 1113, we haven't had any issues on that. So that's
it's not like the Pope's calling you up and saying, right, you need to deploy here or you need to do this. You are doing things off your own bat. You are coming up with your own decisions on where you actually put your aid, where you put your effort. It's just more of a figurehead.
No, it's not quite as simple as that. The Pope does have a cardinal that focuses on it. We have what we call chaplains. So we try and make sure that we work with the Vatican, not against the Vatican, work closely with the Vatican. So far, that's worked well. Where the Pope has had a difference of opinion, we've made some changes. And we have done that, actually, in the last 10 years, because he wants it to be more focused on where the church is heading. So the obedience is quite real. It's not just a rhetoric on the side, and can result in changes as to how the order works. But so far the order is delivering on its mission. We seek funds. We get funds in Europe, particularly, with lots of volunteers, Red Cross, and all of those that are not Knights of Malta, but they're all associated with Malta. And in Australia, we've 30 years now, so we've the order is generally tended to be doctors, lawyers. I'm neither of those, but that's sort of where it's. So it's an order that I don't broadcast the fact that I'm a Knight of Malta with what I do. I just.
Well, you are now, because I will be broadcasting.
Yeah. Well, I'm a Knight of Malta now, but I don't, just to make that point. It's just, you'd see it in my CV, but I don't go around and say when I'm doing any work, I'm doing it as a Knight of Malta. You just do the work, keep your organisation and superiors informed of what you're doing. And I have to say the strength of the Order of Malta, it's not very intrusive in the life of the knights and dames. It's quite clear what they do and what they don't do. So it's not like other religious orders, where you the only time where you really where you can see us distinctively as knights is when we wear the robes, right, at Mass. We've got one this coming Sunday, right, at the cathedral. So we wear those, and you wear the stuff, and And it looks really, a lot of people say, they always have a double look. But that's quite a good thing in that it preserves that historical link from the 11th century, and I think it's across the world. And so when you join together, for example, we offer regular retreats. One of the things we always encourage people to do is to go to Lourdes. Every year there's a Order of Malta works in with the Lourdes. I think that message is very connected to Order of Malta. So I'm hoping to go to Lourdes next year, but I have been to Lourdes before, and it's always been a really good experience. We donned the Order of Malta medical gear, and so I was dealing with a disabled person, and you always get things happen when you're around with hundreds of people, but when they light candles, for example, and a fire breaks out, you've got to take action to stop the fire. So you get all these things happening. But look, it's a great way to connect with different countries, Ireland, England, and all, if they come at Lourdes, and that's a good way to celebrate the message of Order of Malta, because it's also got strong devotion to the Virgin Mary as well.
Mm-hmm. So a strong historical resemblance, like humans need to know their history. The ability to bind together to help others out in times of need has been happening for a long time now. I mean, it's a necessity. It's part of humanity, and it's parts that we're often missing because we lack the history of like others before us doing it. What do we have to look up to? I think one of the most important aspects that I see to these nights is they give people hope, and they give people that have some sort of ability, some sort of resilience, some sort of privilege to help out, to share and look after their fellow man throughout the world.
Yeah, I think that's certainly what we hope. We have retreats and all of that to further that. But at the end of the day, whether you're a knight or it's faith driven. So you could be Catholic, non-Catholic, or whatever. For me personally, this transcends anything that we talked about so far. For me, being in the Catholic faith bit is the big learning lesson for me is that when you are attacked for what you believe in, visualize that you are being crucified and experience it, right? But there's a big but here. You're going to resurrect because Jesus resurrected. And that gives one of the most amazing bursts of energy in your day-to-day life. So I always use that, and that insight only has come to me in the last couple of years, that when I do get that, all of us have it, I visualize that you are getting crucified, but I know that because you believe in Jesus of Nazareth, you're going to resurrect, and it does happen. So in the daily meditation that I do, that is what I do every morning. I just do that, and each day is a new day. So when I go to the Catholic Mass, for example, one of the key reasons to go to the Mass is what I call transubstantiation, which is when you receive the communion, it is the body and blood of Christ. Right? So you can actually feel that within yourself. When there's no Catholic church available, it doesn't matter which churches, I'll still attend it. When I've been overseas, I've attended non-Catholic, non-Christian areas, including Buddhist, Muslim, Hindu, because in the end, it's the unity of all religions. Rather than not attend any service at all, like in Asia sometimes, there just isn't a Christian or a Catholic church, but there is in a village. You'll find a Buddhist centre, a Hindu centre, and a Muslim centre, and you just take into it, and you find it gives a new vision to the Holy Spirit and the Trinity. And Trinity is actually remarkably congruent with three frames. Right? Because it's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So when you look at that from a three frames point of view, it is virtually the same. So by, good fortune or whatever, the three frames that I described earlier, its spiritual base is the Trinity.
Well, I must admit, Jim, look, regardless, you have a lot of energy to achieve all the things that you do on a daily basis, let alone that continues throughout the year and the years. There's a lot of energy there. And wherever you get this energy from, it's impressive to see.
Well, the energy, I would say, is exogenous. That it's outside of yourself. So as long as I do the morning meditation, and I can do it running on the spot in a hotel, or I can do it on my cross trainer. As long as I do that, I can. I've learned to use the ancient Indian chakras, that take you up and down, and I basically invoke the Holy Spirit in each of those chakras as you open and close it. And I find that if I do that daily meditation, there is an energy outside of yourself, I call it exogenous, that drives you. And if you fail, things go, pear-shaped, the crucifixion imagery that I gave you becomes a really good way to deal with it. Because you won't sit there in a permanent depression, because I find an amazing burst of energy takes place after you've experienced the crucifixion. Right? So I've actually spoke to my psychiatry siblings, because I thought this might be a dangerous area. I said, so what do you think of this? And the reaction I got was rather surprising. They said that if you're actually experiencing this, that's a good thing, because most people who are very positive, they ignore the negativity in their lives and suppress it, and that makes them ill. Right? I never thought about it that way. So he said, if you're authentic about whatever you're experiencing and you've got this resurrection bit, then it happens. But the other thing I'll tell you about this is that when you have this exogenous energy, there is a serendipity in the universe that a lot of us don't understand or appreciate. Einstein's colleague actually articulated this very well. So it basically means that if you're in this area and you're caught and you don't know what to do next, you just let go and serendipity takes over. I found that to be true. I've gone back and I said, I've tried my best, I don't think there's anything I can do. The next thing, all these things just open up. It's not me doing it, it's serendipity. And we've lost serendipity because we've been caught in the scientific quicksand of cause and effect, rather than opening it much broadly. And Einstein himself was much broader in thinking. So that to me is a very important insight. And if you look at the great theologians like St. Thomas Aquinas and others, they had that view, St. Augustine and others as we're moving through, particularly on the more existentialist side. So it's really just letting go, but it also means you're still learning what's happening around you. Doesn't mean you ignore science, you ignore everything else, but you don't have to take the science as it. That's it. I honestly can tell you, in the last 2 years, I no longer fear death. Death is actually an illusion, from my point of view. So while you're here in this body and you're moving, add as much value as you can, and when this body ceases to work, which you call death, I can literally move into the next dimension, or whatever you want to call it.
I like that. That's a really good point there, what you're talking about. And one thing that you were talking about there just before too that really resonated with me was you were talking about the negativity, people rejecting negativity, not wanting to accept it. And that made me think about what you were talking about earlier when we were talking about the 3 frames.
Yeah.
And you said about the negative feedback. So not listening to negative feedback, wanting to only listen to
what
good things, or even not even building a system where you can actually take in that negative information. And it makes me think about, like, today in the modern society, how with the algorithms that we use with the social media that we consume, or that a lot of people consume, that we're quite often in that echo chamber where we're only going to hear the things that we want to hear.
Yes.
And sometimes, I mean, those things are negative, but we want to hear just the negative against the other side to us. So it just made me think how there's a replication here, or even a holographic nature that we're looking at between the business side or the theoretical side of this negativity, and then the individual side of a person in their individual life, not wanting to accept the negative, the bad things, and actually deal with that.
Yes.
Would Would you like agree with that sort of works? Like it starts with the individual not wanting to accept negativity, and then if we just extrapolate that out, now we're looking at a business side or a government side that doesn't want to take in opposing views to what they're looking at.
Yeah, I agree with the general comments, but it all depends on your age group, right? So a generation that's now till about 35 have had a different exposure to education than those that are up to 40 and those that are 55 and over, right? There is a gap there, right? And so therefore your understanding of the world around you is quite different. Right? And I think one of the weaknesses of our education system, and I said this when I was Director General of Education, I had quite a feisty argument with the political end, that it was very important in early childhood education, for example, to really put the strongest level of investment so that as young kids, they know how to learn, they know the strengths, weaknesses and all of that. So what we now have, in my view, is a failure of education. I hate to say that. Our education system, for those that are up to the age of 30, has not delivered what it should be delivering. And so we now have a big crisis ahead of us. Those of us who are 55 and over, fast track another 30 years, 50 years. How is this younger group going to support?
What, if you could maybe nut one or two things out and go, right, this is the thing or things that are missing from the educational system or from the general education of a human, what would they be?
Well, that's a very deep question. I think the fundamental things with education is, broadly speaking, is learning, schooling, skilling and work, right? So how am I taught that in school? So you've got a young child, as I'm sure you have, and you're moving through all of that. They come into kindergarten. They're taught by you in the initial phase. When they get into kindergarten, what sort of values and education are they being taught there? How is it engaging with them in their personal growth and everything else, right? And then what sort of relations? So if you did a 3-frame analysis on it, the goal of kindergarten is part of early childhood education. Right? Is that goal being achieved? Are the key relationships and teachers that have the ability to do that there, or are they second-rate people that are not qualified to do it? Right? And are the parents understanding what their responsibilities are in terms of working together and collaboratively with the teachers? And is the feedback being received in a positive way rather than in a protective way? So if I gave feedback on your child that is, he's really out of control, is your reaction to attack me as a nasty teacher, or is it, let me find out what it is and we can work together to see what you have concerns or fixed up, right? So at the moment we don't have that. The positive and negative feedback is not treated, in my view, in a way, and therefore that undermines the capability of the teachers. And tied to this are the unions, right? Now, why should I have to put up with all of this, right? So you've got all these tensions that are occurring right through. So we have a crisis in education at the moment, and we are not using the tools in an intelligent way. Like we suddenly banned all computers from primary schools and all of that. On the surface, that looks very good, but question, what is the reasoning behind that? What are you doing about it? And how do you bring technology in a way that you can embrace it without compromising, the principles of education and moving forward? So we have a real issue here. Like, for example, if I can't read and write properly, do I really need to do that if you've got artificial intelligence and technology happening at a very fast rate? Before we invented writing, what did we use? So why would you now want to institutionalize one thing and use that as the criteria for saying everything is a dismal mess, right? So the reality is we are moving I believe in a very exciting world, but it needs to have an ethical framework. And if it does, I have a positive view for humanity, not the other way around. The problem we do have is that we have serious global conflicts. We've got it in the Middle East, we've got it in Ukraine, and you could potentially have it in China. So what you now have is a situation where those conflicts will impinge on the education system, right? So we're in an unusual phase of human history at the moment. We've got high tech, we've got high conflict on this end, and we've got an aging population that's really aging. You only have to look at Japan, right? China, India is celebrating because it has the younger population at 28, right? Australia is about 35, I think, but what I'm saying is you've got the aging population. Then you also have the possibility of other major breakthroughs like fixing aging up by looking at the genetics and rejuvenating the DNA of individuals. Now that's happening as we speak. So what happens if we're able to do that and I can live for another 100 years without any difficulty? What is the implications of that? And what are the implications for the health system? Right? So we're in a world now where we've got serious conflict on the one hand and you've got accelerated technology on the other hand. And even in this mind heart that I'm dealing with, I can have a proxy that communicates with you, but it's not me. So if that's happening now, what's going to happen 5 years from now? So what I'm saying to you is that we're in a phase where we really have to learn how to bring and integrate technology with what our aspirations are as human beings, which country we're in, how we use that to create a united humanity rather than one that fights each other, and then how do we use that to enhance human beings and their wisdom? Because at the end of the day, even now, there is nothing to beat human intelligence, believe it or not. We're exceptionally, after all, humans have created all of this, right? So, does that answer your question?
I think it does. So, one thing that you talked about there was this potential gap between different age groups.
Yeah.
And that really resonates with me in the sense that we're both now into our 40s. We've had a career doing certain things that is, I would say, rather adventurous. And now we're looking at a future where we would like to put back into the world and do some more humanitarian aid and things like that, but fully understanding that our physical ability to do so might not be the best way that we can actually apply that. So we're getting more into this space where we want to teach people up and actually have people that are trained now to do it and not necessarily have to go through the paths that we went through to do it. So we're looking at this younger group and considering that there is potentially a gap between our age group and this younger group. I'm curious, if you could give one piece of advice to this younger cohort coming up that would aid them in dealing with problems in their life, in maybe adapting, learning, whatever it is, what would that piece of advice be?
I think that piece of advice is actually relatively simple, and that is you get them together and you agree on what is a shared set of values. Once you've got the shared set of values, you've got the connectivity and the bridges between all the age groups. If you can't achieve that, that means you don't have any values. And if you don't have any values, you'll have chaos, unfortunately. Right? So what are the values that unite, the teenagers of today with those in my age group in our 70s? What links them together? And then you can take it down age by age by age. So articulating the values, I think, is extremely important. And what I have found, having done a Bachelor of Divinity, there is more there is more congruence with all the great religions of the world than the other way around. It is the people that take on those religions that decide to fanatically follow a particular line and create discord. But the reality is, when you look at the scriptures of all those religions, the unity of all those religions is overwhelming. And, I found that looking at that, it always struck me as unusual. But what is the way around that is to affirm who you are so you don't waste your time. I find it's much easier to say I'm a practicing Catholic. That way I don't have to question whether being a Catholic is the right way to go. My mind is open to all other religions and how it works. Right? And that's the mistake a lot of people make. They adopt other beliefs thinking it's the best thing since sliced bread. Then they find themselves in a crisis years later and wonder why they did it. Whereas if you accept who you are and then say, all right, I'll adopt these values or X or Y or Z, then I think we can move forward. So we could virtually start that now as colloquiums or study groups or whatever, and look at how we can share shared values and what are they, right? So one of the things, for example, I think Australia needs right now fairly urgently is to respect all religious and non-religious beliefs on both sides of politics. Because at the moment, it's not clear. And if it's not clear, that spells very dangerous red lights, in terms of what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's very, very insightful. I love how you put that too. And personally, I couldn't agree more with that. One last question, kind of heading towards the end and wrapping up now, but one thing, and this is a bit of a sideball for you. I love reading, so I'm always fascinated.
Yeah.
Books. What are you reading right now, and what book, if you were to give a book recommendation, what would it be?
Now I'm going to give you an unusual answer here. I have found that when I've read books, it contaminates my original thinking. Right? So once my original thoughts have matured, then I start to read the books. So for example, Eric Fromm, going back, The Art of Loving, brilliant book. You could read it over and over again, and it's still very powerful. So when you go through the books, I found that when I was doing the Bachelor of Divinity, there's so much of bibliography that after a while you're better off reading the reviews of the books, 150 of them, right? Because the reality is we can't all read individual books from page to page. You can, but for me, I'm happy to read certain books page by page, but otherwise I find that the original thinking and analysis for some reason gets contaminated. Once I've got the clear picture, I'll read the book, no problem. Right? So it's an unusual answer to give you back. So I've been sent quite a few books from friends of mine that have written it, and I've got there ready to read. And I'll probably do it once I've turned 75. I'll start to read more books. But between now and then, it's a problem of time. Where am I going to find the time to read these books?
It's a tough question. Yeah, not enough hours in the day.
And the problem is that some people think that if you read the book or written a book, you've done your bit for humanity. You haven't. Because it has to be followed up with action to actually change the world. Yes, if you've written the book, that's good. People have absorbed it. But it's also got to be translated into particular actions. Sometimes some of the books can also distract you from doing things for the benefit of humanity. I might write a book that says, tough luck, you're on this planet. You can't even accept the fact that you're born in purgatory. So there's good and evil all around you. So why bother? Right? Enjoy your life. Do whatever you can. And so it goes back to the purpose. Why are you on this planet? Why did you get born? Was it just the, pressure to reproduce. That's natural in our genes. So why were you born? So you're born here for a purpose. I mean, I've got 8 siblings. Right? But when I look at my dad and mum, they had a strong purpose for life. And that's why we were all taught to make a difference. Doesn't matter what we were doing. And that inculcation of that value has come through with dad and mum. And that's what I would like to see all parents do. You know, it's a fairly good example. That doesn't mean your life was rosy. Obviously, all of life is full of thorns and roses. It's how you deal with it that matters, you know. And that's why that crucifixion and resurrection bit is very, very powerful insight in terms of you handle thorns and roses.
Life of purpose. Give your kids a life of purpose.
Absolutely. Fundamentally, that is absolutely correct. And if they've got purpose, you'll be surprised how much they will actually do. If they do not have purpose, then it changes. And if you give them an analytical framework where suddenly the world becomes paranoid, you know, there's somebody there out to get me, how do you fix that? Because the world is out to get you at different times. If I was to look at that every day, I wouldn't do anything. Because I've always had people out to get me one shape or the other. You just, you know, you've got to treat it as water off a duck's back.
You've done very well with that, Jim. Very well.
Otherwise, you just, you know, I could spend each day in a quicksand of people are worrying about what's happening. You know, people hacking my account, stealing money from the account, attacking my reputation. I had, in a recent organisation, I told the leader of that, who succeeded me, that this organisation is not about politics, it's about values in the Australia-India trade relationship. If you don't like that, don't attack me, just wish to attack you, but it's not going to change my view. These are the things that need to happen. And when you preach those values and practice it, people will attack you, but at the end they will lose. Because values, I have found over the last 70 years, in the end, always wins, believe it or not. You only have to look at the history of the First, Second World War, and now we're in the Third World War as we're speaking. And that's what happens. And one of our big challenges in Australia is a multicultural organisation, a country. We do not know how to handle overseas issues here. Khalistan from India, for example, right? I had to talk to a couple of friends of mine to tell them to stop bashing each other up. You're bringing India politics into Australia, push it back into India. I would say the same with the Palestinian and the Israeli issue. You know, we're not Israel and Palestine. You can have your views. But once you start to bring all of those, we had that with Croatia and everything else in the past. Australian history is littered with those issues from 1890 onwards. So we have to, as a country, learn to deal with these issues, but still have an identity as a nation. What is our identity? What is the Australian identity? What are the values we stand for? And I think we're at a very delicate point in Australian history where when we did have values, they're not very clear now. And you can see that from the political activism on all sides of politics. I mean, I had a person come up to me, would have been, who thought I was a Hindu, because I looked like one, I suppose. But he said to me, Jim, we should be doing something to get rid of the Lord's Prayer in the Parliament. So I looked at him and I said, let me first disclose that I'm a Christian, so just so you know. But since you're from India, I just want to let you know that we were converted by the Apostle St. Thomas in the 1st century AD, so let's get that clear. Then I went to the next step and I said, let's go through the Lord's Prayer. So I went through the Lord's Prayer, step by step by step, and I said, so what is offensive in there? He couldn't tell me. And I said, if I showed you the Aramaic version, it's even more powerful. You know, it gives you all the broader stuff. So he looked at me and he didn't know what to say. And we don't do enough of that, you know, explaining. And it's part of Australian society as we formed federation and parliaments that the Lord's Prayer is part of it. But it doesn't stop people doing other prayers in Parliament when they come in. But you shouldn't abolish it. I think that would be a really sad day for Australia in terms of its loss of Christocentric values.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think we'll probably wrap it up there. We've covered a lot in this little chat here. It's been very fascinating. Is there a way that people can get a hold of any of your ideas? You mentioned that you're thinking about writing a book, and I'd love to read it if you ever got that out there. But is there any way people can get a hold of your writings or your ideas or
well, they are on the net.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the stuff there, chapters on a book or whatever.
Yep.
But no, I haven't actually written. I can read the reports because even when I wrote the annual reports as the Director General, it had 3 frames in it.
Yep.
So I think it's time to write a book is when I turn 75. I'll do little bits of it.
Yep.
But between now and then, I want to make as much difference as I can, while I can. But it's tough, my wife is retired, so you've still got to balance all of that with everything else. So you've just got to move through. But she's pretty good. She accepts that this is the where we're going. So I think the short answer to that is yes, they can have a look at that. It's available. The different interviews that I've done. Just recently did one with the Australian Museum. They interviewed me on with, and also did one before with the Queensland one. So there are different interviews there elsewhere, but it does need a book at some point to bring it together.
Yeah, I think it'll be fascinating. I look forward to that. But I'll put the links to those resources in the show notes for this. If anyone's interested, and they can check those out.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks very much for today.
Yeah, no,
We'll
pleasure.
let you go so you can catch your plane.
No, my plane now, but oodles of time. There's still another hour. So
and look forward to chatting next time.
yeah, no. Well, thank you for taking the time to interview. I didn't know what to expect from it, but yeah, it's one of those interviews. But I'm very conscious that as each day comes, what you call your last day could be the last day. But it doesn't actually worry me, to be honest. So if I haven't written a book and I died on what you call death, it's not the end of the world at all. It's just we're only in one dimension.